Hello, Verity. Good to see you.
Hi,
Thank you
Emma.
very much for coming to talk to me today.
No problem. Pleasure to be here.
So, as you know, then, the formats of these interviews are to start with your faith journey into Quakers. And I wonder if then you could introduce yourself a bit to everyone by saying, what was it that you first heard about Quakers? What was it like to come for the first time? How was that journey looked like for you? Why? Why are you still coming to Quakers today?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that seems very short, and you could answer it in a short way, or you could answer it in a very sort of could be decades, it could be a lifetime in the making in some ways. And I sort of feel like for me, it was. So there's a practical kind of answer in that I ran a business where I just by chance a couple of my customers were Quakers, and it kind of piqued my interest. So on the practical sense, that kind of set something of interest going. So I ended up going to a meeting on my own, and I went to a couple of different meetings and sort of found a home at one. Um, but I think there's a deeper path. I think that was the kind of culmination, if you like, of where I was heading. I was brought up C of E, really. My mum was very spiritual in the sense that she was a Methodist and then she changed, and her relationship with God was really, really important to her. Um, and she had very strong values around that in a very open-hearted way. Um, she was also quite a complex person, and that relationship with the church kind of bounced around. And um, so I kind of grew up with that being very sort of present in my life. I went through teenage years where I rejected that. I became very involved in the left, so that sort of value driven stuff sort of took its life in that way, through protest and sort of angry stuff.
Mm.
Um, and then as I moved through my 20s, I sort of fell out with that in some way. I felt like I was just shouting at people all of the time and getting angry. And I really don't like anger. And I find I'm very activated by it. And I actually felt like, how are we ever going to convince people if all we do is shout at them? This doesn't feel like an effective way of changing the world. So I was kind of lost for a bit. And then I think those two things really come together in Quakerism in a way that I knew nothing about Quakerism. So it was very powerful when I kind of understood that, value and spirituality sort of meshes together in that way. And although I've been interested in sort of Eastern forms, there's this kind of meditation and Buddhism, and that was very strong as I was going through my 20s. It was kind of very en vogue, if you like. It was very exciting to me to find something that had Western historical legacy, if you like. It's probably not the right word, because not that I wanted to reject Eastern sort of mysticism and spiritualism, but it was exciting to find that there was a tradition of it there. I might have had relatives who went to it, or ancestors who went there, and the fact that actually we didn't get it always all wrong. There were people experiencing these things in these towns and these villages, and I find that very sort of powerful historically as well. So it's a very long-winded answer, but I think that those things really made me feel like this could be a home for me, and my values and where I felt in the world. And I really like the fact that it's not a church, but it's a broad church. So in the sense that people come to it with all sorts of kind of views, and it's about hearing people and working with that, rather than this is what you believe because I'm telling you. And that level of authority I've always struggled with. So it was lots of different things that I think once I found it, it was a really kind of powerful place for me to be.
Yeah. So tell me about your first few times at meeting then. What is it that really spoke to you? Because you could have walked away at that point. So what is it on a practical level, perhaps, that you continue to get something from?
I find meeting for worship and the silence in particular, the gathered silence, very, very powerful for me. People, people who don't know me very, very well see me as a very high energy, it like out and about person in the world, loud, and all of these sorts of things. And actually, I'm an introvert at heart. So all of that energy takes a lot from me. And I really, for me to feel okay in the world and feel like I can be my best in the world, I really need that balance. And I found that the gathered silence of meeting for worship was a place where people weren't, I wasn't having to think about small talk and, you know, what will people think of me? All this sort of brain chatter, you could just be with other people who would accept you as you are, as you turned up, and it didn't matter. And I found that, particularly the first few meetings, I found that really powerful, that I didn't have to kind of tell people what I did or where I came from. Or I would literally be out the door as soon as it finished. I didn't do coffee after. Still find that hard, but that was okay. And that wasn't judged, and that wasn't like, oh, well, you're not doing the right thing. So it's kind of like you can just be. And I found that very restorative, and I found it very powerful for me to feel much more balanced in my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So how long ago was that then?
I think it was just before COVID, so maybe a few months before COVID.
Right, so about 5 years
Oh,
you've
is
been,
that what it is? Probably.
well, it's 20
Crikey. I
25
feel like a
very
new
soon.
Quaker still, though.
Yeah. You feel like a new Quaker still, right? That's kind of what I was getting to, really. I mean, how do you think you have developed or changed at all?
Well, I've recently become a member, and that was something that I really wanted to take my time over, and I wasn't sure that I was going to do that. Um, and I was okay with just exploring that, and I came to a point where I felt like it was the right thing for me. Um, so that's been a change, a very recent change. Um, I feel I feel I'm I'm finding people who have resonance with me within the Quaker world, and people who don't have resonance with me in the Quaker world. And I think that is actually kind of a micro version of life for me in the outside world, because you don't instantly go, yes, all everybody in the world is love. It's kind of, you're going to rub up against people who you're not necessarily going to really gel with or agree with, or you find challenging. And you're going to find people who are interesting and actually, oh, I'm not the only person who thinks that, or oh, that person just said something amazing even though they didn't realize it. Or so I love that, I love that continued process of finding out and working with how I exist in a community of people where you don't 100% always get on with them, and I don't think that's at the core of it, but I think it's important to say that it's not like this is like the idea of like a commune that everybody just loves each other all of the time and everybody's happy. It's how you work through conflict, how you work through disagreement, how
Yeah.
you work through being activated by someone who doesn't realize they're activating you.
Yeah.
That's really powerful and useful, I think. Yeah.
Do you know, you've made me remember I ministered once at my new meeting because I'd sat there and I'd been there for a few months and I was looking around and I thought, right, the skirting boards are painted a green, which is like I don't even know, like a forest green, you might call it, a really bright kind of green. And then the curtains are like turquoise, right? So kind of greeny, but on the bluish, and that clashes. And then the ceiling is painted like a jade green. All three greens are completely clashing. Like they just, you look at one, you go, oh no, that doesn't go with anything. And it really made me think that that's a really good symbol of what meeting can be like. And as you say, any community really. But there they are. They're just being themselves, those colours. And, yes, there's some way in which they don't go together, but actually it doesn't matter. They've each arrived at their own time and there they are. Um, And people didn't really understand my contribution that day, I don't think. I think they kind of thought I was saying, well, it's good to have conflict or something, which perhaps it is, but do you know what I'm trying to get at there?
Totally. It reminds me, actually, I was at meeting on Sunday, and I was talking to a friend, and she just pointed out the flower arrangement. She said, I don't know who's done that, but it's genius. And when I hadn't even noticed it till after meeting when she was talking. And someone had put all these things together. It had dead leaves in it. But they were orangey, and then dead lavender in it. And if you put all those things on, the people would just chuck them in the bin. But it was absolutely stunning. The vase was average, it was, but the sum of its parts was just right. And it was powerful. And I think, yes, things don't have to always look like in themselves that they're going to go together, but there's something about learning from how you exist within that community that's really, really important.
So do you think that the way in which you exist in that community has shifted? I mean, obviously you've been through this membership journey, so that is in itself a very reflective process, and you're obviously been thinking about it. So would you say that you've changed at all? Or has it just been a learning about what Quakers are like?
I think I perhaps feel a little more confident about calling myself a Quaker, or it's okay to be me as a Quaker. It's not like, oh, I've not quite got to that point where I'm this or that. I'm me and I'm a Quaker, and that's fine to be both. I don't have to change, I suppose, to get to this other point. So I'm more confident about that as an identity, I suppose. I find it on my best days, let's put it that, because we don't all, we're not all perfect. No, but on my best days, I find it as a really useful tool to go, okay, how do I work with this? And try and use that as a daily tool as well. I'm reminded of my son goes to a Quaker school, and they recently had a new head appointed. And I would say to him, "Oh, how's the new head?" He'd been there for like maybe a term and a half. I said, "Well, I've never really seen him. He doesn't really say anything. He doesn't." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And this kept going on and kept going on. And about after, maybe a year or so, he was starting to meet with people and ask. And long story short, he was a Quaker, and you could just see that rather than coming in and making a name for himself and telling people how, what his vision was and sharing this, which is kind of what the kind of standard procedure in the world is, and I've got a vision and I'm going to share it with you. He was just sitting back and just looking at how things went, asking people, learning, and that humility of you're a teacher at this school, you've been there for 20, what do you think? You're a student, what do you think? And I thought that was so exemplary of how I'd love to be in life. If I could just take that breath and that humility of like, okay, let's look around, whether it's in a Quaker meeting, you look around and go like, oh, that's person's being like that, or that person's saying that. I might feel activated by that, or I might jump to a conclusion about that, or I might feel cross about that, or I might feel defensive about that. But actually, can I sit with that? Can I even pause and go, is that a learning for me? Is that something that could help me? Is that something that I could be a better human from experiencing? And that, I find that really hard, because I think my experiences through life have been, and I think this is true for a lot of women, and women who have experienced trauma, where you immediately you have to armor up, and that's out of necessity, because it's the only way you've got through to this point. And I think we can be, and it's not specific to women, but I see that we have to be like that, because otherwise we would have been destroyed. And I feel sometimes I'm very quick to feel they've been like this, they've been, and actually being able to And I think the silence and the Quakerism and that kind of approach of letting things sit, the gatheredness, even, business meeting approach of sit with that, pause. It just takes the reaction out, and the response is it's a better quality, I think.
Yeah, that's such an interesting explanation of that because you're really making it sound like, I suppose, an arena in which, you use it for personal reflection and development, and you talked about armoring up. And what it's making me think of, Verity, is one time I was having a conversation with a male Quaker, and I said to him, I think there are times at which a kind of a pushing back against bad behavior about we were talking about when people kind of, I don't know, kick off or people act inappropriately. And he was kind of getting at the, turn the other cheek, that the kind of the biblical message, the message of Jesus is always to take on board that kind of flack. And I was trying to say, I think it's really important sometimes that you need to push back and say no, and there's a boundary there. And he really challenged me on it, and we never finished the conversation because he said, well, what do you think is I mean, in Quaker Faith and Practice, he said, well, where's the justification for pushing back? I suppose he was thinking about pacifism and our peace testimony. But what you've just said about maybe it is actually something that women need to do more than men. I don't know. I've parked that conversation that happened a few years ago about women's need to perhaps assert boundaries. And maybe he didn't get that because as a man he never had to do that. But if women just turned the other cheek all the time, I mean, I, I don't know if I don't know. It feels something that's an important part of developing your character almost to develop those boundaries. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. I think it's a very, it's a, Quakers don't exist in a bubble, of course. People bring in unconscious bias all the time into meetings, because we do, because we bring unconscious bias everywhere we go. That is the nature of the world. We bring our own experiences to the meeting. I suppose my reflection is, and this goes true for inside meeting as well as outside meeting, but I find meeting a powerful safe space often to be able to do that, where I feel less safe on the outside world, I think, where I can, and I suppose because there's the silence and the pausing, it's easier for me to stop and take a breath and go, am I feeling activated here? And to not judge that activation, like as you're saying, not to say, oh, well, I shouldn't feel like that, or I shouldn't, turn the other cheek because that's the Christian thing to do. It's saying, I feel like that. This person, my immediate, this person's really like, why are they doing that again? And oh, it drives me mad, or whatever it is, that activation. And saying, it's sort of saying, okay, that's there, that's fine. That's a product of me and who I am, and, the world and what, my place in it. But also, is this helpful to me? Is my reaction to that helping me or not? And if it is, and I think there are times where you and also it's how you have a boundary. I am, this is a process of decades and getting older, and I don't know, lots of things, but I was a massively fiery 20-year. I ask anyone, it'd be swearing at everyone, and it's all armor. It was all protective. It was all because I felt scared in the world and didn't feel safe in the world. And that, it never gets you anywhere. It never gets you anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, when I'm feeling most pleased with myself, I've set a boundary which is firm, which protects me or makes me feel safe, but it doesn't have to be an attack. And that's, I don't get that right 100% of the time, but I can see the difference. And it normally is time. If you react straight away, it's
Yeah.
all just reaction. It is reaction. If you go, right, I'm gonna park that email, or I'm gonna park that person, and then maybe think about it for a day or an hour, whatever you've got, it always is beneficial.
Yeah.
And
But of
yeah.
course, sometimes you need to respond to a situation, don't you? In
Mm-hmm.
that's happening right in front of you. And of course, I've just remembered that we bumped into each other at the conference, and
Mm-hmm.
we probably hadn't seen each other for a good few years before that. Um, and the conference is really one of the main, the Future of Quakerism conference, October 2024, is the main reason that got me going on this idea of doing the interviews, because we were having interesting conversations. And of course, we were both there at that time when we had this kind of, if you remember the toddler there kind of playing quite in a rowdy way and within the session. And I was a bit frustrated at the time that I don't know who I thought might be best placed to help out and to do something. But I thought perhaps, the elders might have stepped in, or the staff might have stepped in, or somebody that knew the child might have just helped the mother to kind of manage that situation. And because that to me is an example of boundaries, you see, setting boundaries of what's going to work in this situation. And I don't think we always get it right. And I think that was a situation where I don't think we got it right. Have you reflected on that at all about what, what did you think of the way Quakers do community and around that kind of example?
I think, I mean, there's sort of two questions in there. What do I think about Quakers and doing community, which I think, is a broader question. And then there's a specific example of an incident at the conference. I think that specific moment, I feel like there was a lot of activation from a lot of different places. And it all was like a big, essentially, it was something that ideally could have been avoided much earlier on. It got to the point where it shouldn't have got to.
Well, that
Um,
I suppose is my point, isn't it? Is that in one of the earlier sessions is where something could have happened to stop these things. And I think that's a good example where if you don't act with boundaries early on, the boundaries going to need to be harder and harder eventually because something's going to unravel. So what sorry, I interrupted you, but at either at that point where we were both together or earlier on in the conference, what did you feel could have happened?
I think there's an ideal scenario, and I think what happened after really ideally could have happened before, which was there was much more need identified than perhaps anticipated, and that all fell into place beautifully at moments afterwards where I saw so much community with that child and
Yeah.
support and love, and it was really beautiful to see. I don't think that wasn't in existence beforehand, but I don't think the anticipation or even the need was expressed. And I think that is a challenge. That it's easy with hindsight to say, well, those things weren't put in place, or that person should have just asked. And I've been a young, a mum with a really small
Yeah.
kid, and someone said, "Do you need any help?" Oh, no, no, it's fine. Do you need just what do you? You don't, that is not.
Yeah.
It's not always that easy to A, ask for, or B, recognize that you need. You're in the
Mm.
kind of zone of managing and doing it, particularly when you're on your own,
Yeah.
which I'm a single parent and I know what that's like. So
But it takes a village to raise a child, doesn't it?
yeah.
And I just felt that for me it was a symbolic um example. It was a kind of it played out in front of us. 200 people were sat there. And and that I felt really sorry for that young mother coping on her own, and that little chap who was lovely. I thought, yeah, the after effects of all of that, of being then um it kind of all not working out to an ideal way, let's just say. There's when that happens, if people behave in a way within a community situation and they're not given firm boundaries early on in a very gentle way, then the behavior does perhaps start to get more impactful. So then the boundaries are put in place in a firmer way, which is more shocking. And I think it can be more harmful to people where people start to feel a bit more potentially shame around it, think, oh, I did something wrong there. I shouldn't have done it like that. When in actual fact, if if a boundary had been put in place and some support and some help had happened earlier, it would have been so much more loving as a community response. And I suppose what worries me about the way we do community in Quakers at the moment is that there's sometimes a passivity around it. And I don't know why that is. And is it just me? We talk about kind of rubbing up against people and kind of, our own personal frustrations come out. But I find the Quaker community is sometimes passive, and that in any other situation I might have been in, people would have acted. And I don't know why that is. I can't analyze that situation in my own mind. I think in other situations somebody would have acted and said something and helped out, and but it took the situation kind of um, being brought to everyone's attention before it then all happened more beautifully. Does that resonate with you at all?
I think yes, in the sense that it is a shame that the thing that happened after didn't happen before. I think that's true. I think there's a lovely, do you know Brown? Do you read any of
Yeah,
her stuff?
yeah, yeah. Well, I know who you mean. Yeah. The
And there's,
vulnerability is the big point that she talks about,
yes,
isn't it?
one of the most powerful things I read, I always try and lodge in my brain when my activation is on full alert is generally speaking, people are doing the best they can in the circumstances they find themselves in, which before you think, oh, that's going to sound like turning the other cheek, I don't think that is. And I think what the point she is making is we can view people's behavior as acceptable or not, or what could have been better, or could have, why didn't they think of that? Why didn't they do that? And I think for what for whatever for a myriad of reasons, and we could drill down into them, that situation or the wider situation of Quaker community, I think people are doing the best they can in the circumstances they find themselves in. That might be because they are at capacity. It might be because they are tunnel visioned into what their faith means to them and
Mm,
struggle to widen that to others. It might mean that they think they're doing the right thing, but we're a diverse bunch of people, and that isn't the right thing for somebody else. I think I won't say I'm brilliant or always feeling that truth, but I do think it is a truth. Um, and it's a very useful tool for me now. Like we're a month or so away after that conference. Were people doing the best they can in the circumstances they found themselves in? Were people thinking, well, I could do, I can't be bothered helping. I don't really care. Of course they care. Of
yeah.
course they wanted to help. Of course they love. But they, for whatever reason, probably 100 different reasons, 200 different reasons, struggled to show the ideal response. And
Mhm.
that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it, the net result was not great. But I think the motivation and the net result is a really important thing to kind of separate,
Yeah.
because otherwise we lose compassion for anyone or for people. And when we lose compassion for people, that's the peace testimony for me. That's
Yeah.
where that is.
I don't know if you saw the lovely interaction afterwards. Um, but because of course, as you know, I said to the child, don't throw your toys, just go and play with them, because we don't want you to hurt anybody throwing them. So and then a few people left with the child, of course. What happened later when I came out of the room, um, they were in the corridor, and I went up to the mother to start a conversation, because that must have been very difficult for her, and I recognized that. And the little boy came running over, and I mean he was quite small, and he pushed my legs. So I crouched down and I said, "Oh, you must be feeling really angry, because I said to you, not to throw your toys, and I'm sorry about that." And as I was doing that, I kind of had my hand out in front of me, kind of saying that to him, and he held my hand. And then he went to kiss it, and I said, "Oh, all right, you've forgiven me now, so we've made up." Because he wasn't really verbal, was he? He was pre-verbal. But it was a lovely moment of kind of just how community should be, we fall out and we get back together again, and we kind of make up and communicate um but yeah, it just made me think really about what it is about 200 people sat watching Ben Pink Dandelion give a talk and remain glued to our seats. Let's go on a different tack then. I've got a couple of other things that you've said which I wanted to kind of ask a bit more about. You said you sent your son to a Quaker school, but you've also just told me that you had a really kind of left wing political period in your youth. Are you surprised that you've now sent your son to which I'm assuming it's an independent private school? Are you surprised at all? Has that been a point of I don't know, internal discussion with yourself about the politics of it?
Absolutely. I mean, my mum had a saying, she's no longer with us, the Lord moves in a mysterious way, and sometimes the Lord has a way of, oh, this will show you and your principles. I would have been, like, and it's a really, thank you for asking the question, because actually it's a very difficult time in some ways. So I work in a co-op with a lot of left-wing people. I have a lot of left-leaning, as we all do in the Quaker community. um and no, this is a great metaphor for the current world that we're in some ways, because I feel that despite the lack of tolerance and enforced discipline and sausage factory nature of academies, state school academies that exist, the appalling way that children are taught, and they're not given an education, that they have employability lessons now. Anyway, we all know, and it's not the teacher's fault. It's the chronic. Anyway, we all know where that is, and the education system. I was given an opportunity for my son to have a bursary, to have an experience that is just beyond anything I could have ever imagined, or afforded. What an incredible opportunity to give my son. I understand that not everybody is given that opportunity. I often say to people, say your, closest relative, who you like, absolute, closest relative, was dying of cancer or the waiting lists on the NHS are 5 years, whatever they are. My mum died of cancer because the waiting list was too long and it took too long to discover it, right? We couldn't afford private healthcare or anything like that. If someone said, I'll pay
Yeah.
for you to go to Bupa and have that operation or have that treatment so that your relative can have the best possible care, would that person go, oh no, because my other neighbors, they can't afford that, so I'm not going to take it, I'm going to let my close relative die?
Mm.
Or suddenly there's a different debate around that. I know people who are at this school, which is nothing. There's a massive assumption about all independent schools are like Eton, of which, of course, they're not. Most of the people I know who go to this school, the stories are incredible. The autism support, which is just non-existent in any state school now, it's impossible to get anywhere. Whatever part of the spectrum you're on, the support they get there is incredible, where they just would have struggled massively in mainstream school. I met one parent at a meeting who, it's a grandparent, and by the way, grandparents massively fund, these places at Quaker School, whose granddaughter sibling had committed suicide and just couldn't cope with mainstream school. This is a place of safety and care and nurturing. And I know I'm going on about this, but I really feel strongly that I feel massively judged for it. And I don't think I should be. When people make a choice, maybe they want to get a really nice car, right? I don't know how much a really nice car costs, but I reckon it's about 300 quid a month or something. How much is that a year?
Mm-hmm.
And do we say, well, you can't have a nice car because I can't afford a nice car? Or my
Yeah.
my friend is paying for that car. I've got a relative who's given me some money, so we don't make judgments about how we choose to spend our money, or if the money is given to us by a community of people who want the best opportunities. So I think it's, again, people don't ask about it, people just make assumptions, and people really don't think about the detail of the situation, I suppose.
So what is it about the school that makes it a very nurturing place, like the sounds of, by the sounds of it? Is it because it's smaller numbers and smaller class sizes? Is that the main thing, or is there a particular way of
I think that helps,
managing?
but I don't think it is that. No, I think um, it's the relationship, particularly
Mhm.
between the teaching staff and the pupils, where there's an interest in them, as they know their names for a start, which is unlikely in a lot of schools nowadays, sadly. They know what their passions are. They're able to say, well, if you like doing that, why don't you come along at lunchtime and do this? They take an interest in them as other humans. There's a mutual respect, and that respect, and it is not born out of authority and discipline, which is something that I feel really strongly about. It's about, as we know in Quakers, it's about respecting each other. And Vinny my son has loved coming along to that Quaker meeting and being respected as a human, not talked down to. Be People are interested in him as much as he's interested in them, and being treated as an equal is a really, really powerful thing for a child to experience. And that, I think, has certainly for my son been a really powerful thing, and allow him to sort of explore who he is,
Yeah.
and discover things that he wouldn't been able to before. um he would have academically thrived anywhere. That it's not for him to come out with straight A's, and I wouldn't care less if he did or he didn't. It's about the experiences as he is growing up and becoming an older human in the world, that I want him to have those role models, those inspiring humans that he has a community of. That is so important to me.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And I suppose I'm wondering how your experience of the school is around behavior management, which I know is a massive thing for many, many schools. I mean, we've just been talking about boundaries and being clear with firm boundaries early on before things, unravel. What do you think their approach is around behavior management?
I can only tell you my experience, and and it isn't that it doesn't, that there isn't bad behavior. Let me, it's not.
Yeah.
There's only a few Quakers there for a start, and
Yeah.
it's full of like kids going through their teenage years with all sorts of emotions and
Exactly. Yeah.
hormones. So those things happen, and
Yeah.
my son's been the victim of things like that, and so it's been interesting the process that we've gone through with that. I suppose as a Quaker, my response as a parent has been different. My son's response as a Quaker has been different. So there's been mediation, reconciling, forgiveness, communication, understanding.
Yeah.
So, for example, in this context, um, the conflict that occurred was actually as a result of one child misunderstanding what another child said because they're from a different culture and the words meant something totally different to them.
Right.
So being able to have that communication and understanding of, oh, I didn't realize that meant that to you. I'm so sorry. I would never have said it if I thought that's what it meant. And this person saying, well, I understand that you didn't,
Mhm.
and rebuilding. And
Yeah.
I just think that there is very little space for that in mainstream schools now. It's
Mhm.
punishment. They have things called isolations in academy. You're sent to isolation like it's a prison. I mean, you've got a lot of experience. It's the prison model, and I find it astounding and
So are
sad.
you saying you have experience of the academy model because of where your child used to go to, and you could
Um,
compare?
I think just I know other people. Most of
Okay.
my friends, experience academies. They're everywhere, and particularly where I live, a lot of them have been taken over by those sort of, we've brought someone in to run this academy to up the English, up the maths, up the attendance, and they're their three priorities, and that's it. And discipline is seen as something which is about authority and not answering back and not questioning. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think the fact that my son is encouraged to ask questions, is encouraged to think creatively, they're all things that I think are brilliant. And I think it's so sad
Mhm.
that most children aren't given that opportunity. Yeah.
So if we bring back the conversation to a Quaker meeting then, and especially what you've just talked about is not just a school thing, is it? As you were just saying, it's part of being in a Quaker community that we all benefit from this to different degrees, really. The culture, if you like, and perhaps structure within the Quaker meeting. What do you make of the current way we do things? Because we're making it sound pretty idyllic here. Um,
I think it's I think it's a well, the conference was testament to the fact that we are perhaps in a state of change at the moment where there is forces pulling in different directions. And I think it's interesting to witness the what I would call the old way of doing things and how important that old way of doing things is to some people. I
what are you thinking about when you say that, the old way of doing things?
There are many examples of things someone will say, Verity, could you do that? Or Verity, can you do this? Is what we need. We need it this. And I'm like, can I ask why? And the answer is because that's how we do it. That's how we do it. That's how we've always done it. And that is whether people vocalize that or not, or they just say it in that way, that because we've always done it, that is how we always do it. There's a very, very big value placed on that, of quite a conservative value of
Right.
this is how we've always done it, back to 16 whatever it was. That's how we've always, there's this line. And I think people are very frightened about the line going all squiggly. And um if it's not broken, then no problem. But I think where things are coming, the gears are grinding, is things are a bit broken. People are struggling to maintain those ways, but they don't want them to necessarily massively change.
So what kinds of things are you talking about here then?
I think I mean, I see it mainly on a micro level because I'm not, I don't,
Okay,
but,
well, a specific
I
example,
think,
yeah.
the kind of bureaucracy of Quakers, it feels like a bureaucracy to me. It feels unnecessary a lot of the time. And a lot of pressure is put on individual people,
Yeah,
um, who then sort of struggling and feel resentful of other people who aren't doing as much. Then, it can create that kind of spiral. Um, I think they're, like are you providing a written report? Why do you want a written report? What and if I understand that that's a really important thing, and spiritually, there's a real value to that, and I can that's something that I'm not going to question. But if it's because we've always done a written report, I find that harder to just go along with. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot of like layers of this stuff that it feels like, do you know what, we could make life a lot easier for ourselves
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
do and be more spiritual, be more human, be able to give more of ourselves to, not to Quakerism, but to being a Quaker in the world, if we didn't have all this other stuff.
yeah,
And I also think sometimes it lends itself to, and I've seen this on the left as well, a kind of, oh, we don't have a hierarchy, but there is a hierarchy. Oh, because I know how we do things and you don't know how we do things. That immediately creates a gap. And I'm always a little bit wary of those gaps. And I don't think they're necessarily helpful. And I think, sometimes there's a bit of a knowledge power thing, like I've I've read all of this. I understand all of this. I can quote all of this. I can, I know who these people are, and I know who Paul Parker is, or like there's all that sort of stuff. Um, that I
yeah,
think is kind of, we have to just be a little bit careful around. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I remember you saying at the conference, somebody said, "Oh, well, this guy needs no introduction."
That's what he does to me.
And you said, "Well, who is he?"
Yeah,
No, yeah. Yeah, and even just saying, "Oh, well, this is Paul Parker, the recording clerk," doesn't help you very much, does it? It doesn't really help you if you're relatively new. It
and
probably takes you 10 years to kind of get these kind of things.
halfway through the conference, I had to lean over to someone and ask them what the book of discipline was. I had no idea it was the big red book, Quaker Faith
Yeah,
and Practice. I didn't know it had another name.
yeah,
I
yeah,
still don't know what Meetings for Sufferings is. I could look that one up. But do you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's kind of like there's jargon, and it's okay using those words. I'm not saying we shouldn't use those words, but if we do use those words and we want to be inclusive, we have to explain to people what they are, or because
Mm.
otherwise we are excluding people.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And you see, this is where it's interesting, what you were just talking about reminded me of that passivity again, you see, is that this kind of reluctance to move away from this apostolic line, if you like, from what George Fox put down or Margaret Fell put down, um, and kind of not wanting to change that bureaucratic method. I find that another example of the passivity, the kind of it's a, I don't know, it's a gentle and peaceful way, which is fine, and I love it too. But sometimes I just see that there's not enough pushback. There's not enough setting of, well, hold on a second, I do have boundaries around my time, for example, or boundaries around the amount of Sunday afternoon I want to give over to a particular, meeting for business. And we kind of think, oh, well, the right thing to do is to go along with it. And before you know it, you've sat through an hour and a half of a business meeting talking about a load of different things, which you think, well, is all of that necessary to sit here for this amount of time? Little things like that are happening day in, day out, week in, week out. Um, so I agree with your description of it as bureaucracy. And I, again, I kind of would call it passive. I think there's a passivity around it, which worries me really. Um,
I think I think there is a where my frustrations are is I think at the core of what the thinking of the Quaker business method is beautiful
Mm,
and powerful and replicable in the wider world. So I would not for any moment say, well, we need to throw the Quaker business method out the window, because it's like that is something we need to nurture. And but that spiritual experience of business meeting is something that everybody really would, hand on heart, say it's a rarity rather than a common experience. And I think that's maybe the conversation of like, we all love Quaker business method. We all, when we have those rare moments when we feel like the minute is coming out of the room, and it's brilliant and amazing, and that's what we're all there for. We're all in it for that. But where we're not having the conversation is that isn't happening.
yeah.
We've fallen into the more pedestrian way of doing it, and I agree. I think you're a bold person, Emma, and you're someone who is not afraid to speak up, and that is powerful. I think that, and I can see that passivity is something that really rubs up against you. But I also think, and maybe I'm challenging you here, and this is a safe place to do that, is to
Yeah,
say that
yeah.
some people may be being passive, some people may be being frightened and don't have the same boldness and strength that you have a massive amount of strength and confidence, and not everybody does. And I'm not making excuses for them, but it's like, how do we bring those people and keep them as part of our community if they're not feeling like, they're just feeling lost, or they don't feel able to put.
Sure. I
You
mean,
see what I'm saying?
yeah, definitely. I really feel that, and I get that. Um, and I suppose what if somebody is in that situation, and people like yourself and me are asking questions about, well, why are we doing this? Do we need this bureaucratic process here, or could that be laid down? And there's then a defense of that, and a kind of an insistence that we must carry on. So if you like, they're not listening to the bolder voices who are questioning why, and you know putting this bureaucratic method that we have um on trial, if you like, because you could argue that it's a wonderful business method. We both love it, but is it right for everything? Do we all need to have a discernment process of that length and of that depth and of that beauty to talk about all of these minor little points? I don't believe so. I think we need to keep the bold the process which allows these big, bold kind of decisions to be taken, for the important matters, not the minor details.
I was listening to what you said, and it made me think of, sometimes I get asked to go into college or speak to students about a career in the media, because I've done that in my life. And I tend to pick sort of three key things that I think no one else is going to tell them, you know.
Okay.
Um, and one of the things I always, this is, I've learned this the hard way, but it made me think of what you mentioned there. I say to them, don't wait to be picked. So in the sense that I think this is true in a lot of careers in the arts, you wait, you get picked for an audition, or you get chosen to be the breakfast show reporter, or you get chosen to be the, and I think you go through a lot of your young period of adult life waiting for someone to say, you're good enough to do this, you've worked hard enough, and we're going to pick you to
Yeah.
do, and you kind of waiting and waiting and waiting. And I got massively frustrated with that, because for various reasons I didn't get picked, because I didn't have the right voice, or I didn't, whatever it was. I didn't have the sensibilities of, and it was a revelation to me. I don't have to wait to be picked. I can choose my own life and choose and pick myself. And I think there is something in asking the question, who are we asking the questions of? Because almost we're creating a hierarchy. If we're asking, can we do this? Why? Who are we asking that of? And
Yeah.
maybe we have to go back a little bit and go, actually, we don't have a hierarchy. There is no one to ask these questions of. We exist in an equal community where my view is my view, your view is your view,
Yeah.
and permission is a group
Yeah.
discernment. Now, I'm not saying that always happens, but what I'm saying is we are playing our part in reinforcing, because I think of our natural way that women in particular are treated in society. It's permission, it's permission, it's permission. You can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And we go, well, why can't we? This is not right. But actually,
Yeah.
we're by asking, we're validating something that we don't want to recognize. Am I making sense?
You absolutely are. And I mean, there's a few things, right, that come to mind because I think it's about this channel, right? I decided I'm not going to wait for my letter to be accepted in the friend. I'm not going to wait for being asked to I don't know, respond to this particular question or whatever. I'm just going to start recording talk conversations and put my own channel out. So I suppose that fits into what you've just said. I stopped asking permission and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to get on and do it. But the other things it made me think about, which I'm a bit conflicted about, I'm voted with my feet. I have not been to various bureaucratic bits of the system, in terms of local business meeting and area meetings and all sorts. I vote with my feet. And I feel conflicted about that. I feel like I'm letting the group down, that these group processes exist at the moment, and I'm just not there. And I kind of think, well, for exactly the reasons you've just pointed out, I'm validating it if I turn up and then to raise my hand and say, well, why are we doing that? Well, if I'm not there, it's obvious. And the third thing that I've started doing, which again I feel conflicted about, I've stopped giving money to Britain Yearly Meeting. I have this sense that we have too many staff at the centre. And I think, well, again, rather than saying, here's my money, please don't use it for that. I want you to use it. Oh, are you listening to me? No, you're not. Okay. I'm just not going to give you my money. Now, again, I feel conflicted about that, whether that's an irresponsible thing to do. But it's what you've just spoken about there is why I've done those three things. Stopped attending stuff I'm not interested in, stop funding stuff I don't believe in, and make my own channel to get my own conversations out there. Um, but 7.5 people to watch, however many people eventually watch it. I mean, do those three examples make sense to you? Are we talking about the same thing there? What do you think of those three things that I'm doing without
I
permission?
I think it's absolutely one of the things I really like about you is you feel to me to be very connected to what drives you spiritually. The decisions you make are not, oh, well, I'm going to do that to really piss off that person, or I'm going to do that to. I think you really think about what is important for you as a Quaker spiritually to exist in this community and to flourish in this community and to be the best human you can be in the world. And I think, therefore, I have a lot of respect for the decisions that you make because I know you won't make them lightly or motivated by the wrong things. You want to be accepted as a Quaker in your community with the views that you have. And I also think you are someone, you don't necessarily share the same views as everybody else.
Mhm.
And you also are not, you're not going to, you don't expect everyone to have the same views as you either, I don't think.
No.
I think you just want to feel that there is a place that those views can exist and be discussed and be heard. Not, even if people disagree with you, you're okay with that. But it's a place, and so I'm getting away from the point, and I'm not trying to avoid it. But I think it all comes from you feeling like you want to have integrity in your spirituality, and that's what I'm trying to say. The decisions
Yeah.
that you make have integrity to you existing as a Quaker in the world and in your community, and you have a real strong feeling about I can't do that because it doesn't have integrity for me right now. And it might change,
Yeah.
it might, you are where you are now. And that is really important for you. But I think that integrity for you, and that's something I've always valued about you,
Yeah.
is really important.
So do you think it's okay that I do that then, Verity? Because I recognize I'm seeking your permission here that
Well,
I
I'm not giving you permission because I am not, I am just a human. You are giving yourself permission. And
yeah,
that
yeah.
is
Well,
actually really, really important.
exactly. And and I think that is why I want to have these conversations because I do feel sometimes that there is censorship across our society and that we're kind of not allowed to say certain things, which I just think is very unhelpful. The conversation will happen without you, so I'd rather us be involved in these conversations, and disagree with each other within the community, really. So well, thank you for that. I feel a bit embarrassed that you've been so insightful on my motivations, but I appreciate it very much.
Well, I absolutely love talking to you, Emma. And I have to say, you appeared at the Quaker conference at a time when I was feeling very activated by a small thing. And it was, a very godly moment for me that you popped up and sort of sat next to me and just really made me feel okay at a point where I wasn't feeling that great. So, yes, don't underestimate, the power they have in the world.
Yeah, well, that goes for you too. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Let's call it a day, and leave on a high note, appreciating each other. So thank you very much for your time.
No worries.